Welcome to Beyond the Ballads, where we peel back the layers of romanticized history. Today, we're tackling a topic often shrouded in myth: forbidden love in the Middle Ages. We often picture grand tragic affairs like Tristan and Isolde or Romeo and Juliet. But for most medieval people, forbidden love wasn't about epic poetry. It was about complex legal codes, social stigma, and the overwhelming authority of the Church. It was less about passionate defiance and more about pragmatic, sometimes boring, battles against deeply entrenched societal norms. We're going to explore what truly constituted forbidden love, why it was so difficult, and what the real consequences were, which often involved more paperwork than passion. So, what made love forbidden in the first place? In the Middle Ages, marriage was far more than a personal union. It was a sacrament, regulated by the Church's canon law. This wasn't just about religious doctrine. It was the law of the land across much of Europe. The Church dictated who could marry whom, when, and under what circumstances. This meant that any relationship falling outside these strict guidelines was not just frowned upon, but legally prohibited, deemed sinful, and could carry severe penalties. It wasn't just about infidelity. It encompassed a vast array of social and familial restrictions that most modern societies wouldn't even consider. Understanding this legal framework is key to grasping why so many relationships were deemed forbidden. One of the most complex and boring areas of forbidden love involved consanguinity and affinity. Consanguinity referred to blood relations. You couldn't marry anyone within a certain degree of kinship. Affinity was even broader, extending to relations by marriage or even spiritual kinship, like godparents. For example, marrying your deceased spouse's cousin could be forbidden. These rules were incredibly intricate, sometimes extending to the seventh degree of kinship, which meant almost everyone in a small village could be related. Nobles often sought dispensations from the Pope for strategic marriages, turning forbidden into allowable for a fee. But for commoners, these rules often forced them to seek partners far afield, or risk an annulment and social ruin. It was a bureaucratic minefield for anyone trying to find a spouse. Perhaps the most widespread and boring tale of forbidden love concerned clerical celibacy. From the 11th century onwards, the Church increasingly enforced celibacy for priests, monks, and nuns. The ideal was absolute chastity, devoted solely to God. The reality? Widespread, open, and often tolerated violations. Priests commonly lived with women, had children, and passed on their benefices to their offspring. This wasn't a dramatic, secret affair. It was an open secret, a pervasive aspect of medieval life that frustrated reformers for centuries. The Church continually issued decrees against it, but local custom and human nature often won out. It was a forbidden love that was almost institutionalized by its sheer commonality. These clerical relationships weren't always passionate romances. They were often practical arrangements. A priest might have a concubine. a term that could mean anything from a long-term partner to a housekeeper with whom he had children. The legal status of these children was precarious. They were often illegitimate, facing social disadvantage. Efforts to enforce celibacy led to some truly mundane punishments: fines, removal from office, or public penance. Yet many priests simply paid the fines and continued their lives. It highlights how forbidden love wasn't always a dramatic scandal, but a persistent, often administrative problem for the Church, and a practical reality for many communities who valued their local priest regardless of his marital status. Adultery, of course, was strictly forbidden. But unlike today, it was often seen less as a betrayal of emotional trust and more as a violation of property rights, especially for women. A wife's adultery was a crime against her husband's lineage, threatening the legitimacy of his heirs. Her punishment could be severe, ranging from public shaming to corporal punishment, or even death in some regions. A husband's adultery, while still a sin, was often viewed with more leniency, reflecting the patriarchal nature of medieval society. There was no concept of divorce as we understand it, only annulment, which declared a marriage was never valid. So, forbidden love outside of marriage often meant a lifetime of illicit meetings and constant fear of discovery. While most adultery cases were mundane, some high-stakes affairs did grab headlines, or at least court records. Royal and noble adulteries often had profound political implications. Take, for instance, the accusations against Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the age. While her first marriage to Louis VII of France was annulled on grounds of consanguinity, rumors of affairs, particularly with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch, circulated and fueled the divorce. Later, her marriage to Henry II of England produced constant friction, and whispers of his own numerous affairs, like with Rosamund Clifford, show how even the most powerful were entangled in forbidden liaisons, often with devastating personal and political consequences. These were less about passionate romance and more about power, succession, and dynastic stability. Love across class divides was another form of forbidden affection. A noble falling for a commoner, or vice versa, faced immense social pressure and practical barriers. Marriage was a tool for alliance, land, and power, especially for the nobility. Marrying beneath one's station could mean loss of inheritance, titles, or social standing. For commoners, a relationship with a noble could offer protection, but also expose them to great danger, as their status offered little legal recourse. While stories of such unions exist, they were often tragic or involved substantial social upheaval. The boring reality was that most people married within their social class, driven by economic necessity and social expectation, making cross-class love a genuine rarity, if not outright folly. When faced with forbidden love, or an undesirable arranged marriage, some medieval couples resorted to elopement or abduction. Elopement, while seemingly romantic, was incredibly risky. They'd lose family support, inheritance, and face social ostracism. Abduction, on the other hand, was a far more serious matter, often a crime. While some abductions might have been staged, consensual elopements to avoid family disapproval, others were violent acts with severe legal consequences for the abductor. Consider the case of Agnes de Dunbar, who, in the 14th century, was abducted and married against her will. The legal battles that followed were long and drawn out, highlighting the procedural nightmare that forbidden love could become, far from the dramatic rescue narratives we often imagine. Another common, yet often overlooked, form of forbidden love arose from pre-contracts and bigamy. In medieval law, a verbal promise to marry, especially if followed by consummation, could be considered a binding marriage in the eyes of the church, even without a formal ceremony. This led to complex situations where someone might enter into a second marriage only to have a prior unfulfilled promise invalidate it. This wasn't always malicious bigamy. It was often confusion or ignorance of the law. The consequences could be annulment, public penance, or even excommunication. These cases filled the church courts, not with tales of passion, but with tedious testimonies about who said what, when, and to whom. Purely bureaucratic, forbidden love. While rarely documented openly, same-sex relationships also represent a form